Hey Lucio, and hi to your students. Thanks for asking me these questions about search marketing. I've been doing this for about 20 years, and I've had a YouTube channel talking about these things since 2005. So just go and look at Jim Boot on YouTube if you want to dig in deeper to any of this. And it's important to note with search marketing is that most people will have a different opinion about different aspects. All right, so just because I say it doesn't mean it's the way that everyone does it. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So one of the first questions that Lucio's asked me is, what's the difference between SEO and SEM? A lot of us who have been in the industry for a while sort of got a little bit eye roll when we talk about SEM, because SEM stands for search engine marketing, SEO stands for search engine optimization. Both the poorly named acronyms are described to use how we use search marketing. SEO will typically only apply to organic results, those are results that are not paid for in Google, and also other search engines. And SEM usually refers to paid advertising in search engines. Now, in the case of, say, Bing, you might only, in a lot of searches, you'll only have 4 organic results, but you might have 19 paid results. In Google, depending on the search that you do, typically you will have anywhere from 10 organic results to possibly about, with shopping ads and a few other things, you could have another 10 paid results as well. So the idea has always been to try to get ranked high in Google without paying Google or any other search engine money, and that's search engine optimization. But when you think about it, they're both search engine marketing. So and this is the question we always get, how do I get my website to rank high on Google? So this is what we call an organic ranking. One way you can get your site to rank high on Google, though, is just to buy an ad. But you have to pay Google for that, right? So you can go to number 1 like that with an ad if you pay enough money. Now, the art of getting ranked number 1 organically for a given search phrase, there's a lot that goes into that. And it will vary between industry, type of site, type of platform, and it is a long-term ongoing strategy. And the reason for that is, even though we call it search engine optimization, it's a collection of tasks that really help search engines understand your site and make the site work better for users. So even though that we call it search engine optimization, it really is just making the site perform better and be clearer and easier to use. Simple as that. But that's what the search engines are looking for. So that's why we call these tasks that enable that search engine optimization. One of the easiest ways, and there's a lot of people that will disagree with me about this, and that's okay. One of the easiest ways to get a site starting to rank high is by doing good PR. And you will find a lot of SEO companies have moved into the PR industry because of it, because they've found that PR is starting to help their sites rank. Now, some have moved into PR because they look at it as a way to get backlinks. A backlink is one page that links to one of your pages. So that's a backlink. And the difference with Google and the other search engines back in 1999 was that Google changed the way that it worked out how to rank a site. They looked at the number of links to a page as a vote for that page. That became the new standard of search engines. And their results were a lot better than the other search engines at the time that were easily gamed. By bringing in this ranking signal or factor or metric of looking at other pages that were linked to yours, it got past a lot of that scamming. However, it didn't take long for our industry to work out ways to get backlinks that weren't actually votes for our site. So what a lot of the SEO industry has done, they've moved into PR because they see it as a way of getting high quality backlinks. But I would argue you're better off just doing good PR, because if you're doing PR to get backlinks, you're not interested in television, which doesn't give you a backlink. You're not interested in major news publications, which by and large will not give you a backlink. And you're certainly not interested in radio. Now, we've got specific examples of where we've seen good campaigns on radio relate to a rise in rankings. And the reason for that is that one of the things that Google said about search engine optimization in 2017 was that citations and brand mentions also count as much as backlinks do. So citations can be things like a LinkedIn page, or it could be anything else that references you in a paper, just talks about you. But the more important one is your brand mentions. So how does Google know that people are talking about your brand? Some people will say, well, they crawl social media. Maybe, but that's a hard way to work out how many people are talking about your brand. I would propose, and Google hasn't said this, that the way Google finds out who's Googling your brand is inside Google. A lot of people don't know that the most Googled word in Australia is actually Google. And the reason for that is that we're not stupid, we're just a little bit naive about our browsers. And that is that most browsers will have the location bar is actually a search bar for a search engine. So people want to go and do a search in Google, they just type in Google. So they get to Google. If people want to go to a brand, they'll just type in the brand name and hopefully it'll pop up in auto suggestions, right? So we're very lazy and we tend to use search more so as a navigational tool these days than anything else. And Google has that information. So one of the things that you can do is work on getting more people searching for your brand. And that involves PR in social, in YouTube, in ads, in radio, in television, newspapers, whatever. Whatever it takes to build a brand normally is what you should be doing. The other side of SEO and how to get your site ranked high is making sure it is technically the best it possibly can be. That it's not throwing errors for Google or users. That it's fast, that it's great to use, that it's not hard to find things. These are all things that add, because these are great sites that Google wants to send people to. It doesn't want to send people to sites that are what we call over-optimized with lots and lots of text to try to game the search engines with keywords to get lifted up. What Google's looking for is sites that people want to go to. And we specialize mainly in e-commerce sites. So Google's looking for sites in that case that are easy to buy from and purchase from and find things. Okay, what's the next question we've got from Lucio? What is on-page and off-page optimization? Well, it's a little bit like what I just said. Off-page optimization is what some people would refer to as backlinks. I refer to it as getting all your properties outside your website configured properly, working properly. So that's things like, there's all sorts of things, and there'll be new things next week. So the ones I list right now will probably be out of date soon. But things like, you know, your LinkedIn profiles, all your social media profiles, your Google My Business listing, any associations, directories, anything like that. And some will say, oh, well, that's just trying to game Google by getting a backlink. Well, remember, yes, backlinks count, but there are other things that also count. And we look at backlinks as we would look at applause, in that they come after the performance. So if you can get people talking about your brand, whether it be through traditional advertising, digital advertising, or just good social media, whatever it might be, then that is going to lift your profile. That is going to get people talking about your brand and sharing your site link, right? So the thing is, you know, there's lots of sorts of backlinks that will help a business, but some of them Google doesn't even know about. And they're things like Skype, SMS. Google doesn't know where they come from, but they're backlinks and they're friends sharing links to other information, right? So they're only going to do that if they know about the brand. That's why the brand, you've got to double down on. Be aware of all the technical things on the site, and we'll get to some of the tools that you can use for that in a second. But I would say if there was one technical thing to focus upon or else, it would be speed. Speed is the fundamental. We don't like waiting, and most of us are on mobile phones rather than a desktop now. So you want to be fast and quick. And a lot of the time people still aren't on 4G. They might be on 3G depending on where they are in a city. So what's the basics of search engine marketing or paid advertising? So on the two platforms that we do paid advertising, well, not including Facebook, if we're just talking about search, it's basically, there's different types of ad products depending on what you're doing. So for e-commerce, you'll see what we call a lot of shopping ads or picture ads, and they're things where you'll see at the top of Bing and Google ads with images in them that people can just click on and buy. Now, you don't pay for appearing there until someone actually clicks on your ad. That's why it's often called pay-per-click marketing. And the products that are out there now, some of them are using artificial intelligence. And these are products like Google Smart Shopping. And what we have found as an agency over the years is that those sorts of products work a lot better once you do good SEO on a site, right? And when I say good SEO, I mean correct labeling of things, making sure that, you know, for images and those sorts of things, you're thinking about people who have accessibility issues, so that, you know, you're using things like alt tags to tell us what an image is about, or you're using descriptive file names about an image, so we know that someone who's using a screen reader can understand what that image is about. All of these things are important, and it helps Google quickly understand what a page is about and what its content is about. So by doing good SEO, it helps the artificial intelligence advertising products work out what content to send people to. And that includes things like making sure that the site doesn't have, you know, thousands of duplicate pages, so Google and the other search engines don't know which one to choose from, and all those sorts of things. So good housekeeping on a website is really important for paid advertising. How do you explain the importance of search marketing for the CEO? Well, if the CEO is old enough to remember a thing called Yellow Pages, we'd probably talk about that a little bit. And in that, back in the day, it was a big book with lots of pages and became really good for standing your monitor on. But back then, there were two types of advertising in that as well. There was paid, and there was what we called organic. You just got a listing. But the people who made more money, of course, were the ones who took out the big ads. And some of them took out 3 or 4 ads. Now, pre-Google, you weren't going to miss out on that, and you were going to optimize your Yellow Pages listings. You're always going to do that. And the same should apply for the search engines, paid and organic. Now, the thing is to remember with the CEO too, is that you can put a direct return to the efforts that you're doing with, certainly with paid. It's very easy to do. You can say we're going to spend X and we want to multiply that spend by X amount of revenue. So for us, for a lot of our clients, what they want to see is 1,000% return on their revenue that they do for paid. So, and they're the conversations that we have with CEOs is, well, how much money do you want to invest in this and how much do you want to make? And that's entirely feasible to do with, say, Google ads. And we will say, well, you know, do you want 10 times? And sometimes, depending on the client, they'll need more, or they'll need less, depending on the gross profit margin. And it varies between business. But there's a lot of ways that you can make complete sense to a CEO with this by saying, this is just advertising, it's investing in your business. And the organic is going to help the paid work better. You will still get more traffic from organic. And if you're not optimizing both the organic and the paid, your competitors are. So you probably should. And the other thing too is that, and this is a practice I really don't like of Google, but it's out there. You can go and buy someone's brand name in Google. Now, as long as you don't display that in the ad, you can rank above them if they're not buying an ad for their own brand name. And you might have spent, 20 years investing in that brand name, but someone can come along and just buy an ad and sit above you organically. So if you are not aware of Google ads and those sorts of things, you really should, and the CEO should be on top of it to make sure that they're one step ahead of the competitor. What are some of the digital marketing platforms? Okay, there are a bunch, and you can get lost, and everyone uses them differently. You can get lost in some of the tools. I guess some of the industry standards out there, the one that we use every day would be Google Search Console. Another one would be SEMrush. It's a great tool, but it's got a lot of stuff in it, and it's got so much stuff. But it really is a good tool. Google Analytics, certainly. We also have things set up like Pingdom for our clients so that we know if a site has any downtime at all, because that's going to affect your ads, it's going to affect your organic traffic, and it's going to affect your conversion rates as well on your site. So you've got to have all this monitoring set up and in place. But I would say, some of the most popular ones are the ones I've already mentioned, plus also webpagetest.org for speed checking, and Google's got a bunch of tools for speed checking as well. So there are alternatives to some of those tools I've just mentioned, but they're typically the ones that we would use. So I would go along and have a look at some of those and find the ones that mean most to you and you get the most out of. How do you pick effective search marketing KPIs? That's a really good question. So for ads, it's quite easy for us. It's about, are we getting the return? And with e-commerce sites, it's incredibly easy. Are we getting the return on that investment in ads? Are we getting 1,000% return? For organic, it's a little bit more difficult because, what's of value to the client? So it used to be, hey, we're number one for X amount of keywords. Well, what is the value of that number one ranking to the business if on a mobile device there are no organic results for a lot of searches? Not on that first screen. You have to scroll to like the third screen on a mobile device to actually see an organic result, because we've usually got the first screen is a page of ads, so paid position. The second screen is typically something to do with location-based services, or it might be a Google knowledge graph or information or something like that. But typically, your on mobile organic results do not start until screen 3. So it's more difficult to measure the effectiveness of organic search, because we've got some clients that have done content in the past where they've written a blog post or something like that because someone in the marketing team said, there's a lot of people searching for this, we should write a blog post on this, and they'll get bucket loads of traffic on it. Bucket loads. And that's one metric that people will use, is bucket loads of traffic from Google Organic. However, the traffic doesn't convert because they're not there to interact with that site. They're just after that piece of information. So you can get a lot of traffic and it won't convert. You can get ranked number one for phrases that aren't really that valuable to a business, and they can take a long time to get ranked high. So the way we set parameters for our clients, and for an e-commerce agency, it's really easy for us, because we'll say, okay, to the client, well, what are your revenue goals over the next 12 months? And then we look at all the channels and we work out, well, where are the improvements? Where can we grow? And then we look at organic and we say, well, we have to grow revenue from that by X. We're not that necessarily concerned with getting extra traffic unless it's obvious that extra traffic's used. Most sites that we encounter will have enough traffic what they're not doing properly is the technical SEO side of things and the user experience side of things. So they're not getting the conversions that are possible. A lot of people think that a 3% conversion rate as an industry standard is good. I don't. I think if 3 people out of 100 walk into a bricks and mortar store, I think if 100 people walk into a bricks and mortar store and only 3 of them buy, I don't think that's a great experience for those other 97 people. And the other thing to look at too is that with both of these channels of paid and organic, you've got to go and look down at what devices they're coming in on as well. And you will find sometimes that, mobile conversions might be much higher on paid than they are on organic. And typically your organic conversion rates are going to be lower than paid. And that's because you're not as targeted with those searches. You can't be as targeted, but they're still important. You still need to be there. So to measure for us, and we've spent years doing this, we've tried a lot of different metrics to measure the KPI. And I did have one person say to me, Jim, you've just got me to #1 for outdoor timber ceiling fan with light. It took you a month. I spent X. What's that worth to me? And it was at that point, it was about 5 years ago, I went, yeah, it's hard to justify that value. So we switched to a revenue-based model where we look at all the channels, all the devices, and work out how we're going to use these things together rather than separating them out into different silos. We bring in UX, SEO, and paid, and we work on them holistically. We don't silo them out. So the same people working on SEO are the same people working on the ads. And I think that's important because I see search marketing as one thing now. And with the dominance of paid on mobile devices now, since about 2013, 14, it's there's been a lot more paid traffic. And if you don't have these two groups working together, your paid and your organic, then what can happen is that someone in paid might decide to do a brand campaign, which incidentally is a great idea. And that is just buying their brand. And some people will say, well, I don't want to do that because I should rank organically #1 for my brand. And that's true. And a lot of the time you will, but sometimes you won't. All right. So it's important to do that because you can also then target those landing pages that you're sending those people to. But if that happens, if someone in paid decides to do a brand campaign, all of a sudden, overnight, the organic team lose a lot of traffic and they look bad. So if traffic is your metric and you switch on ads for a brand campaign, the SEO people look terrible, even though you might still be ranked #1 and nothing's changed. So you've got to look at the overall picture and how it's affecting the business, like we would a traditional offline business. What are some of the biggest challenges in search? I think some of the biggest challenges in search are really the platforms themselves. And then second to that, I would say the clients. And I'll explain that in a second. We have wonderful clients, don't get me wrong. But initially the biggest challenge in search is the platforms because they're not made with search engines first in mind. And every platform will have its own little idiosyncrasies that you have to go and fix or change. There's platforms out there that do things where you just think, this is crazy. I've just recorded a show today where I've shown that every time this one particular e-commerce platform, when someone unpublishes something, Google sees it as what's called a 403 error. Which is bad. It means that we're forbidding Google and that it shouldn't be doing that. It should be doing it another way, and that's taking time away from Google where it could be spending on other parts of your site. So all of these platforms have different challenges. It's understanding those challenges, and one of the easiest ways that you can start to see those idiosyncrasies of a platform is by using something like Google Search Console. Secondly, I would say the clients, because search is an industry that's been around a while now, and there's been a lot of people come and go on the agency side, and a lot of business owners have had a go at search themselves, or they've worked with people who've had a go with search, or they've seen it before, and they've had an experience in it, and they might have a certain belief that certain things should be done a certain way. And so that can be a challenge as well, because it's always changing, search. So back in 1999, we used to just throw a few keywords in the keyword meta tag and change a page title and done. When Google came along, and then we just, went out and submitted a website to 1,000 junk business directories, and bang, we're number one. Not a problem, easy. It changed significantly since then, right? You just can't do that anymore. And there was an update from Google in 2009, which really brought it home to me, and how Google was changing. And this is one of the major challenges is the way that Google changes things. And if you become focused on what Google does rather than what your customers to the site or your users of the site are doing, you can waste a lot of time and effort. But if you focus on making the experience awesome for your users, and you make sure you've got the technical stuff right, fixing all the errors in Google Search Console, all those sorts of things, then you will rank really well. So one of the things that can be a challenge with Google is updates. And in 2009, there was an update which was called the Vince update. And overnight, all these brand sites, big brands, all went to number one. Prior to that, it was really easy to rank higher than a brand. And we thought at the time that Google has just thrown on some sort of brand ranking switch in the algorithm. Google came out and said, no, that's not what we've done. What we have done is that the update is actually a trust update. So there are three pillars to Google's guidelines for users who they help rate their algorithm. And they are expertise, authority, and trust. Does a piece of content have expertise, authority, and trust? Google says in 2009, it was a trust update. Okay, so what they said was that by doing that and the brands going to number one meant that the way that the Google Trust Update works is that brands are trustworthy. So that's another thing about building a brand, is hard, and that's probably one of the harder things to convince clients of, is that you should be doing PR. We'll look after the technical stuff. Don't worry about your backlinks. Let's do maybe some branding video ads on YouTube or something like that. But there's a number of ways you can do it, and the traditional branding stuff works, but getting that brand made aware and trying to convince owners that that's important for SEO, if they've had previous experience of SEO, that can be a challenge as well. By and large, organic is more stressful, or SEO is more stressful than paid. So if you don't like stress, I wouldn't recommend going into SEO, because things can happen overnight. Someone at the company can move something, someone else can change a page title over here, you don't know, something happens, and things go kaput overnight. But just remember that no one has all the answers, but you won't go wrong if you focus on the users of the site first and make sure the site is technically sound, even if you're on a hosted platform like one of the big ones, because they all have issues, and I've just shown some this morning that definitely have issues, and we're talking to those platforms right now. But Don't get concerned with anything too much external. Stick to the user experience, because that's what Google's looking for. Google's looking for great sites. Just be the great site. Get Google to chase you. Don't chase Google. Thanks very much. And make sure you subscribe to youtube.com/JimBoot. Thanks. Bye.